Joined by Marlee Matlin today, who has recently become a collaborator and an integral part of the Feeling Through family. But, Marlee, I feel like I've gotten to know you well in some respects over the last couple months, but there's a lot that I still don't really know about you, that this is a perfect opportunity for me personally to also get to know you a little bit better. And I'm really excited to just have a conversation about a lot of different things today.
And you know what? What my favorite color is?
Why don't we start with that? What is it?
Because you asked me if you want to learn more about me, so I'm going to tell you. First thing up, purple is my favorite color. So there you go.
That's a great color.
Now we'll get that out of the way. Now we can jump into the conversation.
I think isn't purple like associated with royalty? Isn't that like what they say?
Well, I didn't know that, but maybe so. Yeah, it certainly. It's a warm feeling. It feels very it represents unity to me. It represents and it's also a little bit unisex. I mean, anyone can wear purple. Doesn't matter. I think it's a color that brings people together.
Well, there's so many things I want to talk to you about today, but for me personally, where I'd like to start, because it's actually the first reference point for me in my life of knowing who Marlee Matlin was. I was an avid fan of Seinfeld growing up, and I very distinctly remember the episode that you were on for a number of reasons. One, because it was great, and Seinfeld was my favorite show. And two, because it's the first memory that I have of seeing a deaf actor on screen. And, I'm just, I guess the first question of that is what is, knowing that was such a big, obviously you'd already won an Oscar at that point, but that was the biggest show on TV at the time. And I'm sure, like me, there were a lot of other people seeing an actor who was deaf for the first time. What was that experience like for you?
Actually, the experience was awesome. When I recall being told that there was an offer for me to make an appearance on Seinfeld, and I was in New York, and I don't know what I was doing there. I might have been filming something, and I was in a hotel room, and I got a phone call from my agent, who screamed and said, "You're gonna be busy in the next 2 or 3 weeks. You're going to be doing Seinfeld." And I said, "Oh my God, Seinfeld, okay." And my first thought was, how am I going to work with 4 or 5 cameras at once? I've never had that experience of doing a multicam show, a half-hour sitcom. I mean, I've been in movies, I've been in 1-hour dramas, and I was a little bit concerned how it would work with the way they shoot the show. But then once I read the script, I realized, it was perfect. It was perfect. The sense of humor from the writers, from myself, all fit together perfectly. And it was great working with the actors. I was so looking forward to them. They're so talented, brilliantly funny. They made me feel so welcome on that set. And the crew too. And I think I was working out, what was it? I was working at the gym, and Larry David saw me at the gym on a treadmill. And that's how he thought of putting me on the show. And listen, I still get texts, I still get tweets, I still get, hey, I saw you're on Seinfeld tonight, or, you're on a rerun. I mean, those reruns are nice. And it was really a big honor to be part of Jerry's Girls. Jerry told me one time at an Oscar party, we were standing in line, there was like one of those after parties, and he said, "Marlee, our episode, the one with you in it, is one of my top favorites, my top 10 favorites." So that was really nice to hear that from Jerry Seinfeld.
And what's so interesting? Like I went back and rewatched it recently because I remember it very, very well. But also I wanted to look back at it through the eyes of someone who's been in a very different space over the last few years with Feeling Through, understanding much more of the nuance of disability representation, not just in opportunities for actors, but also in the ways the stories are crafted. Something that I found interesting about it, and I'm curious your take on it. On the one hand, your deafness was like a little bit the butt of a joke, but on the other hand, they looked so ridiculous that that they were actually, at the end of the day, the other characters were much more the butt of the joke because of how ridiculous they were.
Exactly. That's why that was the whole point of Seinfeld. That that little group of friends were that they would make fun of people and then end up making fun of themselves. I mean, it was perfect for me because there was nothing where I was pitied or nothing where I was. I mean, it was the other way around, and that was a nice change for everyone to see a deaf character portrayed like that. I mean, I had a scene where we're in the restaurant where they think, okay, I can lip read for them. I could, and they got to figure out how to do this. And meanwhile, they're trying to cover up their mouths and their faces to make sure I wouldn't lip read what they're saying. And then I'd say, I'll do it. It worked both ways. It worked both ways with the humor. And I think, listen, I use my own deafness, my expertness in reading lips, and then you want me to make you look good at a party. And it was this give and take. I mean, Kramer with his ridiculous explanation that he knows sign language, making himself look like a fool. But I sort of go with the flow, in a nice way. I mean, I think there needs to be more comedy like that.
And that's what I loved so much about is that even though it was from quite a while ago, it felt like that it really held up through modern eyes. That it was really nuanced in that way because ultimately, the people in that story that are somewhat objectifying your unique skill are the ones who ultimately look foolish and silly. And I thought that was like a really nuanced way of kind of subverting, what you'd say maybe more kind of outdated storylines. And it really kind of held up for me in a lot of ways.
It still makes sense. It's still fresh. It really still applies today. It's one of the very few shows that I'm very comfortable watching over and over again. It hasn't dated itself. I don't cringe. I don't regret ever having done the show. I wouldn't say, oh my gosh, man, that didn't age very well. That's dated, or why did we do it that way? Listen, over the years, we, of course, whatever it is, what kind of work we do go down different paths. But for some reason, this one has maintained a steady path. And it's a show that, the deaf community has never been embarrassed of. It's one of the first that really expresses a sense of humor when it comes to being deaf. And it was written so well. It was written so well.
You just mentioned, one that the deaf community is never embarrassed by. I know that you're not only the first and only deaf Oscar winner, you're also the youngest in your category. And I can imagine from a very young age, because of the lack of representation of people like you in Hollywood, I imagine you had to really take on a role as an advocate, which you are now very well known as. But I'm wondering, in those early days, how much did you embrace being an advocate versus it was something that was kind of just thrown on you?
I really never did. I never did, to be honest. When I was thrust into the spotlight, into the Hollywood spotlight, a year after I graduated high school, I was thrust into the spotlight just a year after I graduated from high school. And I remember thinking to myself, okay, fine, I'm doing what I love. I realized that my dream was coming true. I'm in a movie. I'm an actor in a movie. As I told Henry Winkler when I was 12, I want to be in Hollywood just like him. And of course, that's what was happening right there at 19 years old. And then I became 20 during the shooting of the film. But I remember before Hollywood, I thought of myself as just a Chicago girl and had never been exposed to the deaf community outside of Chicago. I'd never been exposed to deaf community politics. I didn't know about deaf actors. I only knew one, Linda Bove and Phyllis Braylick, and Bernard Bragg, maybe Ed Waterstreet. But I wasn't that, maybe Bernard Bragg was the one I actually met. And I didn't understand about the politics that were involved in the deaf community. I didn't understand ASL. I didn't understand all the different things about sign language. I wasn't taught about deaf education, really. I didn't know about the politics, about deaf culture and mainstreaming and being in classes with teachers who sign you know, I that's a, it, there was much more to what I was exposed to. I was never taught that. Again, I was just a girl that just, you know, grew up in a community just like anybody else, mainstreamed, having different experiences just like anybody else. But it wasn't until I did Children of a Lesser God, and in all honesty, because there was no social media at the time, I didn't hear about how the deaf community felt about me doing a movie. I didn't know. And I had heard that they were looking for an actor to play my role of Sarah Norman. I think it must have been about for 3 or 4 years. That I knew. Okay. And then when I surfaced, and like, who the hell is this woman and where did she come from? Because there was an active group of deaf performers and artists who knew each other, who fully expected that they would be getting into the role. And I came in at the last hour, the last minute, and got the role. And they're like, who is she to get this role? And when the movie was done, I found myself having to grow up very fast. Everything happened so quick. In fact, it all happened at once. So many things happened at once. And then I realized, oh, okay. Right after I made my appearance the year after I won the Oscar, when I spoke the names of the nominees, is when I realized how much controversy I caused. Because they were angry with me that I spoke, that somehow I was passing along a message to parents of deaf children that what I was doing on stage was the best or preferred mode to communicate, speaking and not signing. And I was thrown for a loop. And it took, I mean, it's a long story, and it was a long journey to get to the point where, I mean, it was tough. It was very tough. But I learned to accept it, and I learned to deflect it. And I don't want to say that I was hurt, but yet I was in many ways where it got to the point. You know, it's funny that you brought this up, because me being in charge of, you know, me being the one to sort of express my opinions about deaf culture, making sure that deaf actors get jobs, making sure that they're portrayed properly or whatever it is, I realized, wait a minute, no, I want to work in collaboration with other people in the deaf community. But people say, I paid the way. Okay, fine, I paid the way. Great. I started the ball rolling, but at the same time, I can't do it alone. And I wish that one thing might have happened, which was I wish somebody would have come up to me right after I won the Oscars, or maybe just before, and just said, hey, we'll help you, we'll guide you to understanding the world that's out there. Because again, I was so young, and I'm talking about someone deaf, being able to help guide me and realize, and I had to learn on my own. I think I just realized all of this about 5 years ago, and I said, you know what? I'm never going to apologize for what I did. If it was speaking at the Oscars, it was because I thought, well, it was right for me. I had to do a lot of growing up, and yet at the end of the day, it's okay. That's why when I see new faces, deaf actors, I always want to go up to them and say, hi, is there anything you need? Is there anything you need to talk about? Let me know. Because I wish someone had done that for me, but that never happened.
You were kind of just getting to this in your response, but, you know, how much, when you take on a new project, how much awareness do you have about how the deaf community is going to respond to that role? How much do you think about that?
It's a good question. I mean, number one, as an actor, deaf or not, you have to like the script. Okay, that's the first thing. Is the script right for me? Is the script something that I can deliver? Is the script does it have a role that I'm comfortable with? Is it something that I can play, type of character? I mean, those are all the aspects that any actor goes through a script. That's what Henry Winkler, again, told me. You have to feel comfortable with the role. You have to feel it fits you. That's the number one priority for me when I read a script. As any actor should, as any actor would, deaf or not. So now, with all of the, you know, conversations and the attention about deafness, deafblind, disability, making noise, saying we're here, we need to work, we need to do the work that's out there. All eyes are on us now as actors and as storytellers, whether we're directors or writers. Or I I'm fine with that. But we need to be able to do what we want to do at the end of the day, as long as we feel that the role is right. And that the role, I mean, obviously has to be politically appropriate. We have to be sensitive to the community. But yeah, things have changed a great deal since when I first started. And you're right, you're right. The role feels right, but at the end of the day, not everyone is going to be 100% happy with the choices that you make. And I have to accept that. I'm not one who looks for controversy. I don't look for controversy.
Is there a role in your career that stands out particularly as like a favorite of yours, whether it was just the experience of taking it on or kind of how other people responded to it?
Well, Sarah Norman in Children of Lesser God will always stay with me. It was my first movie, and I remember every single thing that I did to this day on the set, 35 years later. So many other shows that I've done or movies that I've done has sort of faded into my memories. I remember little highlights, but not the same way as I remember Children of Lesser God. And when I watch the film, I remember exactly what I was doing while we shot that scene during that day. What a huge, huge learning experience it was for me in my life. Where to the point where, I mean, it's just a one of a kind experience. Learning about movie making, learning about what the crew does on the set, learning so much about the craft of acting, working with other actors, working with the director, craft service. You know, I am. But other roles that I really love that I've loved doing, there are a few. I mean, Quantico was a lot of fun because I played, I played a law enforcement officer. I love playing on the L Word because it was a whole different world for me. I love the challenge of that. And The West Wing, I have to say, was so much fun. It was a tough role, but it was a brilliant cast, and it was a lot of fun. And anyone who has the opportunity to work with Aaron Sorkin should be thankful, as I was, because I loved working even for David E. Kelly on Picket Fences. There are so many shows, and a lot of others that I wouldn't want to acknowledge at this point. But at the same time, Children of the Lesser God. To go back to your question, it's Children of the Lesser God.
And I'm wondering, are there certain roles that you have your eye on now that are roles that you haven't had an opportunity to play that you'd really like to, whether it's something really specific or just an archetype of a character?
It has nothing to do with being deaf or not. Just the person. I would love to play a drug addict. And I've been in recovery myself for 34 years. And I know what it's like. And I know what kind of life the drug addict leads because I've experienced addiction, but I've never had an opportunity to play it. I think that would be interesting, a challenge. I think so. So you don't have to be deaf or hearing to be able to take on that role. You can just play the role.
Well, to pick up on that for a moment, there's been a lot of discussion, particularly over the last couple years that I've noticed around there being more characters with disabilities in stories and have them be played by actors with disabilities. But to your point, where do you think we're headed to a time in the not too distant future where there will be more actors with disabilities playing characters that are not only not written as having a disability, but are maybe types of characters that the general public wouldn't normally think of as being able to be played by a person with disabilities? Do you think that's something that's happening?
Well, I mean, look at Peter Dinklage, what he's done in his roles. They don't talk about his stature. Nobody does. He just plays characters that make sense for him, and he's been very hot lately. You have to say, we need more Peter Dinklages. We need more stories where people play a variety of roles, and that includes people who are deaf, just to enhance the story. A deaf character, somebody who happens to be deaf, can enhance the character. It doesn't have to be about being the deafness. We need more of that instead of I mean, I don't want to say we have to dwell on the disability or not, or the deafness. It's not germane to the role. I think more and more, uh, I mean, people are still, I think, intimidated because, well, I mean, they see, about box office ratings, uh, whatever IMDb number they are you number one on IMDb? And on the other hand, oh, we're going to do this project out of love. We're going to do this project for the passion of the project. So those two things are always, on there's always a struggle between the two of them, and disabled actors always have to face that reality. But actors with disabilities should be able to do. I mean, we have to start somewhere. We have to start somewhere, and people need to take risks, and we need to see them being hired. We need more people like you, for example, who are open-minded, who think outside the box, and basically operate without fear, and instead operate with trust. That's why I say to my friends who are actors, when they say, how is it that you can get into the business? How do you get an agent? How do you get a job? And I said, you know what? You have to hustle every day, to get that. I mean, unfortunately, I have the Golden Globe and the Oscar behind me, but I still have to hustle. I have to go to my desk. I have to see what's going on. I look up, I find, I call, I research, I network, I write. And if you can't write like a writer, then find somebody who can write for you as a writer. Of course, it's easier said than done, but you just have to get into it. Hollywood is a very funny business.
You can say that again. Speaking of that hustle, though, I think with whatever progress has happened from Children of a Lesser God to Coda, which, again, to your point, Coda is hopefully a great sign for the future, because not only did it sweep all the major awards at Sundance, it also broke records for an acquisition from Sundance at a $25 million acquisition from Apple. So hopefully that is, sign of more to come of the marriage between, more stories in that space and also the financial element. But knowing that regardless of whatever progress there's been made, frankly speaking, a young actor like yourself is winning an Academy Award right out of the gate was gonna invariably have more challenges than a young actor who was not deaf, given where things were when you won that and where we're still going. How much of you, looking back, would have wished for, say, a more traditional and easier path versus the one that was your path, or not? Like, how much would you have hoped for something different? Or,
well, look, I could say that I'm glad I got my Oscar early. That's all I can say. I'm glad I got my Oscar early because I have it. I got it. I was lucky, which, I mean, I guess it's pure luck. It's timing. I can tell you that I was very, very naive about the business. I didn't know what it all entailed about publicity and what to wear and who you were going to go to the ceremony with. All of those little details that mean so much to the Hollywood community. I walked in completely clueless, and I'm glad I did, because the pressure would have been so much, and I would have been so emotional, and I would have probably overthought it, and I would have driven myself crazy. So I'm glad that I mean, again, I was new. I was as green as could be. I got the Oscar. I said, thank you very much. Thank you for acknowledging my work, most of you. And now, 35 years later, having been in the business that time, and having seen what I've seen in that time, the award buzz, the race, the people getting anxious, the PR, the stakes. And I mean, even last night I saw on CBS a half-hour commercial from Amazon about two of their movies. And I'm thinking, all right, I'm so glad I wasn't part of that now, because I would have been obsessing on it. And I don't think it's healthy. But what's important to me is the work, the people I work with, and hopefully back then I did my job, and I continue to do my job, and I continue to entertain people. And the fact that they acknowledge my work is really special. I mean, that's all I really wanted. So
It's interesting to hear about, your experience of your naivete entering the Oscars at such a young age being a gift for you. Because I went back and watched Children of a Lesser God very recently, and
yeah,
I feel like
it
I
landed in my hands, you know?
yeah. And I feel like when I went back and watched Children of a Lesser God very recently, when we actually first started talking, and something it kind of reminds me of your character in that film, in the sense that you're razor sharp and really smart, but also there is a little bit of a kind of bubble from the rest of the world. You are kind of a little separated from the world around you, and it's kind of your there is like a certain, even though you're so smart, you're so smart in that role, and the character's written so intelligent, there is kind of a naivete because of your distance from others that kind of sounds a little bit similar to your Oscar journey as well, like when you were at the actual experience of being at the Oscars.
Say that, that's an interesting perspective. You could say that. I mean, the real world versus the movie, but art imitating life, life imitating art. Sarah in Children of Lesser God was isolated. She did only attend the school for the deaf, and then when she had no one else to go after graduation, she stayed at the school for the deaf. And then suddenly a man comes into her life who opens her eyes, and she grows up very quickly, and he tries to make her do things she doesn't like to do, but at the same time he's trying to help her grow up into adulthood, where she probably wouldn't have gotten that opportunity from her school principal or her mother, because everybody was struggling to communicate with her. But I think for me, Marlee, I did exactly what every other kid my age was doing. Whether I'm talking about 5 years old up to now, I saw things, I learned things, I just like any other kid would, but all within the bubble of Chicago. Before I knew it, then I was on my own, and I never really planned to move out. I mean, I knew that I didn't want to stay at home, but when I got the movie, I said to myself, okay, I guess this is it. I'm going to have to become an adult very fast. And if I'm going to be leaving home, I, I mean, it was a crazy time. And yet I embraced whatever came my way. And whether it was something I enjoyed or didn't enjoy, whether I had to work at it or whether it came to me easily. And whatever, I mean, I can tell you all the barriers that I faced, but then I broke them down. I broke them down. And while I was breaking them down, I would talk, I would talk to people about how to make things happen. So for example, I dedicated myself to my sobriety. I dedicated myself to closed captioning. I dedicated myself to my career. And I think if it weren't for Children of Lesser God, I don't think I would have been able to do these things. And as I said before, Henry Winkler was one of the many people who helped me along the way. People who have been nothing but good friends, and Henry in particular is somebody that I've known since I was 12 years old, and he's still a mentor to me to this day. So again, I just went along for the ride after the movie, and from the Golden Globe being a complete shocker to me, really, I didn't expect to win anything, only because I didn't know what it was about. Sitting at the front table. I wasn't even sitting at the front table at the Golden Globes. I was sitting at the one level up in the back, and I had Lee press-on nails, and I wore my glasses. I mean, I was just a regular Marlee. Oh, look at all the celebrities. Look at all the glitterati, and that's what kept me sane. No ego whatsoever.
Yeah, and I think if you want the longevity like you are having and are going to continue to have, I think that probably serves you pretty well.
Probably so. I think I agree with you. And I think it was also married with that was playing a big role, being grounded as to be sober at 21, which I did. I got sober at 21, the day after I won the Golden Globe, and entered myself into rehab because I knew that the career path that I was embarking upon was a big deal, and I need to get myself clean. And I did it all by myself, and no support, except for Jack, and my family somewhat. But I can't blame them because, listen, when you talk about a daughter who wants to go sober, they didn't know any better. What are you talking about? I wouldn't blame them for not being there 100%. My dad might have been, but then who gets nominated for an Oscar when you're in rehab? I got nominated for an Oscar in rehab. What a nice bit of trivia I can talk about.
It sounds like you really lived about 3 lives by the time you were 21 years old.
Maybe 4, right? Yeah.
You know, one thing that, talking about family, one line that stood out to me when I watched Children of a Lesser God is that your character Sarah says something to the effect of wanting deaf children. Before you started a family, was that something you personally thought about at all?
In all honesty, I never even thought about starting a family before I did this movie. I was a little too, well, I mean, everyone can decide, but at the time I was so young. I was too selfish to focus on myself, about exploring life out there. And then it was about getting sober. And listen, it didn't happen overnight, my sobriety. It took a while. So I was focused on myself for the longest time. I dated. I had a good time. That's what I was looking for. And so I didn't rush through life until I met the man of my life. And then, of course, it changed.
I think, do you have 4 children? Is it?
I have 4 children. 25, soon to be 21, 18, and 17.
And I'm wondering what pandemic life has been like for you and your family. How many of your kids are at home with you during this last year?
So she, the oldest one, is living on her own. He is at Marquette University. He is a senior in high school, and she is a junior. So the 2 youngest ones are here at home. And I have to say that I'm lucky because they're old enough that they can take care of themselves regarding school and homework. So I don't have to, have a blackboard and become, the teacher at home and homeschool my kids. I tip my hat to all the parents who have had to juggle working at home and homeschooling at home. I mean, so that helps. That helps. I got lucky. But yeah, they miss their friends. And one of them refuses to see their friends in person. It's been a year. All they've done is virtual encounters, maybe 2 or 3, but they keep themselves within a bubble. But yeah, I think the pandemic has really, I don't think I've ever stayed home this long before, an entire year. I'm always on the road, at least 2 or 3 times a month. And my dog and my cat are wondering, why are you still here?
Well, as for someone like you who I imagine has been on the road often for your entire career, has there been something nice about being able to stay put so much, or are you going a little stir crazy now?
I've never talked to so many people in my life. People that I've known, but we really didn't have time to sit and chat. Zoom is now my middle name, and I'm okay with it. A lot of people say that they're zoomed out, and I understand the fatigue that comes with it, but I'm very visual, so Zoom is perfect for me. This is what I like. I love to be able to see people instead of having to send emails or talk on the phone, which of course I can't do. So I'm not complaining about Zoom at all. Thank goodness for that technology. I mean, I cook a lot more. I have to say that. I've been cooking a lot more.
I was going to say that Marlee Matlin doesn't really have that much of a ring to it.
It's okay with me. It's all right. Marlee, Zoom, FaceTime /FaceTime app.
No, there is something interesting, again, just a segue to Feeling Through for a moment. So much of Feeling Through's life has happened virtually. And in certain ways, it's allowed us to reach so many more people. Being present at every single film festival we're in, because they're all virtual and you can be at all of them, and connecting, doing conversations and conferences with people all around the world, has been something that's kind of been made possible, being that everything's virtual and you kind of can be everywhere. So it has had its benefits.
Who can complain about that?
And
I mean, what better way? What better way to connect with people?
It has certainly had some benefits. And firstly, as we transition to feeling through, I also want to say, and I'll say this many more times over, but it's been an absolute honor to have you and Jack on the team. You've been so amazing, such amazing collaborators, so invested and so generous with your time and your energy and your resources. So I'm still kind of on cloud nine about it, even though it's been quite a while. So first, thank you for that.
No, listen, look. I believe in this project. Simple as that. I believe in feeling through. I believe in you. I believe in the actors. I believe in everyone who's associated with this film, whether it was in the making or after, whatever it was behind the scenes. I can't be any more happy about the authenticity that is represented in this film. I mean, yes, we cast a deafblind actor, which is beautiful, and I tip my hat to you for doing that. But at the same time, the whole thing just screams authenticity. The words you've written, the stories you've told, whatever it is that you've expressed throughout the whole feeling through journey that I've had an opportunity to see. I never have taken my eyes off of this journey. And I know that when I look at a project, I look at what my gut says, what I feel, and I say if it's good or not. And this is good. And this is good. And this is what I want to share with the world, because you really, truly, richly deserve everything and all the accolades that come with this film. And so thank you for listening to yourself, because what happened in that one moment that inspired you to do feeling through, what were you doing an hour earlier before that moment that you met the young man that inspired this movie? What were you doing 15 minutes before you did this? What was it 3 minutes before you did this? Well, suddenly you met this guy that changed your life forever. And you changed, as a result, other lives forever. So thank you for being brave. Thank you for trusting yourself. Thank you for making this happen, because it just needed to happen.
Well, thank you, Marlee. I appreciate that. And, as we're talking about producing, I'm hoping, can you talk a little bit more about your producing ventures and what you're focused on, and also what you hope to continue doing in the future from a producing standpoint?
Well, in the past, I would say about, I think I've done 4 or 5 years after I won the Oscar, I was at a point where I thought, you know what, I need to set up a production company with Jack here. And Jack runs this production company called Solo One Productions. And our goal was to find projects, rather than wait for projects, to create our own. I thought, why wait? Jack, write something, find something. So actually, after doing some research, Jack did our first film that we produced together, called Eddie's $1 Million Cook-Off for Disney. And they bought it. And then the next thing you know, we went on to the next project. We shot that in New Zealand. And I wasn't in it, but I couldn't go because my mom was having a quadruple bypass at the time. But that was great. And I mean, that was our first producing effort. And we did a movie for Lifetime that we shot in Oregon, and called Where the Truth Lies, with Regina King. Look where she is these days. I mean, Regina King and I got to work together in a movie I produced, and now she's so hot. So that was another effort on our part to produce. And sometimes you go through dry spells, and it's when I'm working, for example, on a TV series consistently, then I find that the producing efforts are we don't focus on them so much. So I have to learn how to balance that. Um, you're trying to juggle all these different balls in the air. But right now, I am like I'm not done. I'm done with waiting. I'm ready to roll up my sleeves. And I said to Jack, we need to hustle 100 times more, and whatever it is that comes our way, I look at it. I'm looking for projects today where, as I said again, we represent them authentically, the stories authentically, that they're good stories. Uh, Depending on, it doesn't matter what the character is all about. It's not about being deaf. I just look to also collaborate with other people. Uh, I think collaboration is extremely important, especially like we are doing with Feeling Through. And you did a brilliant move by collaborating with the Helen Keller Center, because they're an authentic organization where you can get everything A to Z when it comes to aspects of the deaf-blind community. And I have right now on my slate several projects that I'm excited about, that I'm producing, some that I'm not in, some that I am in. So, and maybe perhaps we can work together again.
I hope so.
If you'll have me.
If you'll have me, I guess it's mutual then. One thing that came up when we first connected about Feeling Through, we also we were also on the same page about how it could be used beyond entertainment, the ways in which we could use it educationally, community building. And one thing that came up was we talked about how, you'd mentioned that it could be something that could be a really good tool to or vessel to help build stronger bridges between the deaf and deaf-blind communities. Communities that, at least in my experience over the last few years, are, quite separate for obvious reasons. They're in many ways, completely distinctively different cultures and communities, but there is also an obvious overlap too that doesn't always necessarily seem to be there as far as cultural connections between the communities. I'm wondering what your thoughts are about that, and about those communities, and how maybe Feeling Through could potentially play a role in building a bridge.
I think you're right. And I think I appreciate the fact that you brought that up, because they are two different worlds. The one thing that just really binds them together is that they can't hear. Deaf people are very dependent on their eyes, and extremely so. Whereas maybe if an individual was deaf, or they had a progressive vision loss, or maybe they were born being deaf and blind, their way of communicating with the world, their tools, are different than the deaf community. They have interpreters just like we do, but in a different form. Yet, at the same time, we understand what it's like to be deaf. I don't understand what it's like to be blind. I don't understand what it would be like to have Usher syndrome. I have a lot of friends with Usher syndrome. I've had friends who at once were sighted and now they're completely without sight. Some high school friends of mine, I've watched this happen to them. And I would hope that Feeling Through, as you said, would bridge these two communities together, where we would get to the point that we could work together, that we could educate the outside world that we're not that different, and yet we are unique communities that want to work together. Listen, once you examine how we go through life, I think it will help everyone else. At first, I have to say, when I met Robert and watched him, and I have to admit, how is he communicating with his interpreters? And I thought, oh, it's fine. It's just another facet. I mean, there's, instead of one interpreter, he has two interpreters. Instead of, they're closer to his vision field. So I'm still learning about people as a result of having this experience of being associated with Feeling Through every day. And yeah.
Yeah, and you were kind of just getting to this, but you'd made some reference points of people that you knew that maybe who were deaf who had lost their eyesight, and obviously getting to know Robert. But I'm wondering, like, beyond those reference points, how much did you know about the deafblind community prior to coming on board with Feeling Through? Like, how much was it? Yeah.
Nothing. Almost nothing.
Yeah, I mean, that was me too.
Almost nothing. No. I had taken a memorial service for Bernard Bragg, and it was a lot of work where we had to coordinate interpreters and we had to plan, and it took it took about 3 months. And at one point, someone at the very last minute said, "So Marlee, because I got 4 interpreters for the event with microphones, and we had to choose who would be other voices, and almost at the very last late hour said, Marlee, what about the deaf-blind community?" And I said, "Oh, what? Oh, right." And I'm so happy that they let me know. To be honest, it wasn't my area of expertise, and I don't want to sound selfish, but I just honestly did not know. So I thought, well, where can we find people? How can we get interpreters? And so I knew someone who was an expert in this arena, and I said, "Can you be in charge of this aspect of the memorial service?" And she took 8 interpreters who were deaf, blind interpreters. And at the end of the day, it worked out beautifully. So that was a big relief to me. So yeah,
it's definitely been, as you well know at this point, certainly a learning experience for me every step of the way. And
absolutely.
And something that I realized too is that, again, as someone who didn't know anyone who was deafblind in my immediate world, I'd also never seen the representation either. So I realized that, like, part of the reason I had no knowledge.
There's not been enough. There's not been enough at all.
Because I literally I couldn't think of a single reference point other than when I remembered learning about Helen Keller as a very young kid. And I realized I had no visual I'd never seen a movie or a TV show or even really a news story that I could ever think of that featured the community.
Well, I mean, I think Richard, we've seen blind people on screens, but again, these were all people putting on costumes of disability or being blind. They weren't authentic.
And that's something that I've had heard spoken about in other ways, but I've recently really taken on how you talk about disability as not a costume that you put on. I love that way of phrasing it. I'm wondering if, I think there's reference points a lot of times that you wouldn't have, like, it would be so obvious to someone now that you wouldn't have a white person place a person of color. Like, I think people would immediately wouldn't have to be explained why that is problematic. And certainly there's historical things that make it a little bit different in certain ways than what you're talking about. But do you liken it to something like that? Do you think there's some point in the future where maybe it's a utopia that we won't get to, but there's so many opportunities for everyone?
I think we're talking about race, and issues of race are so much more deeply problematic than issues having to do with ableism. Race is just something you just can't absolutely do. When you're talking about disability, you're talking about some sort of physical aspect to the person, but race is it's just completely different. So
to that point of being completely different, I'm wondering, do you think there's ever a case, even if it's sometime down the line in a different world, where it would be okay for a non-disabled actor to play a character with disabilities? Do you think that is something that's ever okay?
I think we've seen enough of that. We've seen enough of it. We've seen enough of it because now we are aware of the fact that there are so many actors with disabilities. There are so many actors who are deaf out there who could play the role expertly, who, again, would be playing it authentically. Because if you look at the two, you compare the two, there's nobody that can play the same way as a person who's disabled. Listen, look at the movie Music. Sia's movie. Fine actor, in general, playing the role. But for that movie, for that person, I watched it for the first 2 minutes. I could not stomach watching this person go through what it was like to play a nonverbal person who was autistic. Because the lead actor was shown what it's like to play a nonverbal character, the way that they communicate. It just bothered me because there are wonderful people out there who could have played this role, who are on the spectrum, not in the same level, but could have not completely as the same level as this character, but who, I don't know, I believe fully. I know there are people out there to play the roles if you just look. But to have this cast the way it was, I mean, maybe in the past we would have been more comfortable with it. Fine, okay, it's a character you can play. But I think since what's been going on, I think since what we know, since all the noise that we've made, to have this still happen in 2021, I can't do it. Listen, I love Kate Hudson. I think she's a great actress. I love her mother too, Goldie Hawn. But I just wasn't comfortable watching this movie with her in it. I wish the actress who played the character with autism played it better. I'm not one to criticize an actor's work, but I know what's real. And it was hard for me to watch this actress play opposite Kate. As much as I have respect for the actress in this film. Sia, I respect her music. I know that her intentions probably were good, that she really loved to develop and shoot this film. And I feel bad that she had to lash out the way she did with those who questioned her choices. I feel bad for everyone concerned. It's just not appropriate these days, because these days you can't do this any longer. You just can't. It's a tough situation. I would not criticize or say anything bad about any actor's work, period, though, really.
Well, that's such an interesting example you brought up, because I'm pretty familiar with it. I have not seen the film, but I did read a good amount about it. And I did read about the progression of Sia's response, initially pushing back a lot and then ultimately acknowledging that she's learned a lot in this process. And I think that's such a microcosmic example of the fact that these things have not yet been talked about and thought about enough, because if Sia had thought about it before, she wouldn't have done that.
Maybe. And that is, she did say she spoke to a variety of organizations having to do with autism, which I believe, of course, she probably did. I mean, anyone should who's doing their homework and who had a passion for the project. But yet, and she chose this actress because they were good friends, which is fine. And she believed this actress could do a good job. But the reality was that autism is not something, I mean, it should have been played with somebody who was on the spectrum. That's all I can say. It was simple as that. And I know people think, well, that's what acting is all about. If you can't act a role, then what is it all about? And, we're at that crossroads where we have to answer that question. It's a long conversation. It's a long conversation. We have to educate. We have to, listen, we are entitled to shoot and develop and produce television and films, whatever we want to, and play. That's the fact. But there is a line that we should not cross, that you'll find yourself being taken down hard for not portraying them authentically. It's such a fine line about how do you deal with both sides of the argument. It's very political, or somebody. It's almost akin to what the Republicans and the Democrats and the Independents are going through. I mean, I wouldn't try to touch any of this with a 10-foot pole. Myself, no.
There's this story that comes to mind for me that's very different from what we're talking about, but I think you could use it as an analogy. One of the first films that I ever made, I studied abroad in Prague in the Czech Republic, and I was making a film with a friend of mine there, and we made this film. All the actors were Czech. It was Czech language. We were working with an all Czech crew, and we ended up telling this story of this young man who's enlisted into the military, but he doesn't believe in the war, so he's actually trying to get out of town with his girlfriend so he can evade the war. And we thought it was like an anti-war message, and then we played it. We didn't know a lot about Czech culture at the time. We played it to a Czech audience, and people hated it. They were so angry. We had a Q&A afterwards. They were furious with us. And we didn't think it was the best movie ever, but we didn't think it was that bad. We didn't understand. And then afterward, the our like Czech dorm mother with the program we were on, she told us, yeah, the reason people are really upset is because, Czech Republic had been under foreign occupation for hundreds of years through several different empires, and that's kind of you inadvertently perpetuated a stereotype that Czech people just avoid war, that they just get rolled over, and that they don't want to participate. And the reason that story came to mind is because if you start telling stories about cultures that you don't know about, even if you have the best intentions, you're gonna walk into a trap. So to me, that's authenticity.
You're gonna get taken down. You're gonna get destroyed.
To me, that's like an analogy about authenticity. It's like, well, you don't always have to work solely in stories that are directly your experience, but if you're gonna tell stories that deal with other people's experiences, key word that you mentioned before, collaboration is necessary, because that's how you nail it on the head.
It's your ass otherwise.
Exactly. Well,
I had an interesting perspective from someone that I knew fairly well, who saw Coda, and this person had one comment, that he wasn't crazy. He loved the movie, but the comment that they made was that the portrayal wasn't, or the Rossi family in the film wasn't sophisticated, that they were from a working class neighborhood, and the person was afraid that people in general who had never met or seen deaf people or deaf characters or sign language would think that's what all deaf people were like. And I said, but that's not the case. It's just one aspect of the community who happens to live the way that they live, who work hard, who may not be sophisticated when it comes to salary or social status, but they love each other, they care for each other, and it's much more than just that surface aspect. I mean, yes, we all know there are deaf lawyers, there are deaf doctors, there are rich deaf people, there are poor deaf people, there are homeless deaf people, there are regular deaf people. So, I mean, I think we can tell stories regardless of what people think, or especially characters who just happen to be deaf. And whoever they are, written, however they're written, whatever they do, however they're portrayed. So, I mean, a movie is not the entire world of the deaf community. So, you're right. One has to do the homework, but at the same time, you can still, if you can pick one story, tell that one person's perspective, that's okay. That's what movie making is about.
Yeah,
But it's not. Nobody has ever said that a film represents the entire world.
That's well said, and certainly we've fielded that with Feeling Through as well. So I can totally understand that. But Marlee, we're at time for today. I want to thank you so much.
Whoa,
you'll have to come back another time. We'll do it again.
Okay,
but thank you so much, Jack, as well. And just again, I just want to end by saying I'm so excited for the journey ahead with both of you, and can't wait for everything we're going to experience. So thank you so much.
I couldn't be more happy, and I can't wait for people to see the film, more and more people, to have more discussions about it, people, their friends, their family, their kids. somebody at CBS. I don't know. I don't care. I want everybody to see this movie.
Well, thank you so
Thank
much.
you so much, Doug. Thank you.
And thank you everyone for watching today, and we'll see you next week. Bye.